our Republican friends better look out.
So how was your Thanksgiving dinner this year? A little better than last year? Did your Trump voting uncle have more to say last year than this year? How happy is he this year? What did he want to talk about this year? The unpopular endangered tax cut bill that raises taxes on working people and cuts them on the Trump kids' inheritance? The health care repeal that didn't happen? The president's poll numbers, the big, beautiful border wall that Donald Trump built and Mexico paid for, or didn't? He probably didn't want to talk about this year's election results in Virginia and around the country and what they could mean for 2018, but Donald Trump claims there's much to brag about in his first year in office.
We have done more, they say, than any president in history.
No, they don't say that. No president has mobilized so many Americans in opposition to him in his first year in office. On the first full day of the Trump presidency, millions of women, men, and children across the country marched in the streets to protest Donald Trump's election, the biggest inauguration protest in United States history, the biggest single-day protest of any kind in United States history. Every day of the Trump presidency has continued to mobilize outraged citizens. A week after his inauguration, people spontaneously showed up at airports to protest the Trump travel ban. In the spring, people packed the town halls of Republican members of Congress to protest repealing Obamacare.
I think it's time to repeal and replace you in 2020.
And all of that was before Jimmy Kimmel joined the fight.
A little over a week ago on Friday, April 21st, my wife, Molly, gave birth to a boy, a baby boy. His name is William John Kimmel. And he appeared to be a normal, healthy baby until about 3 hours after he was born. They did an echocardiogram, which is a sonogram of the heart, and found that Billy was born with a heart disease. And I saw a lot of families there, and no parent should ever have to decide if they can afford to save their child's life. It just shouldn't happen. Not here. So.
That was the same week that Donald Trump invited the House Republicans over to the White House for beer and a premature celebration. They underestimated the protesters and patients and healthcare advocates and moms and dads like Jimmy Kimmel, who talked about healthcare on his late-night show over the summer and into the fall. Jimmy Kimmel shamed Republican senators who lied about the impact of their repeal, and he thanked the ones, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and John McCain, who did the right thing.
To all the senators and representatives who stopped this bill, thank you for being reasonable, and know that we're paying attention now, and you'll be hearing from us again.
Tonight, not only is Obamacare still the law of the land, but more than 1.5 million people have signed up for health insurance on the exchanges so far this month. Donald Trump's job approval rating currently stands at 35%, according to a recent Quinnipiac poll. If you think Donald Trump does not share your values and is not honest and is not fit to serve as president, you are not alone. You are the majority. 62% say Donald Trump does not share their values. 58% say Donald Trump is not honest. 57% say Donald Trump is not fit to serve as president. But the only poll that matters is at the ballot box, unless, of course, it is a presidential election, in which case a woman can get 3 million more votes than Donald Trump and not win. In Virginia, the Democrat easily defeated the Trump-endorsed candidate, and exit polls showed that 57% of people who came out to vote disapprove of Donald Trump. In New Jersey, voters elected a Democrat to succeed Chris Christie, who was the first Republican governor to endorse the Trump presidential campaign. In Maine, voters defied their Trump-supporting governor and voted for a ballot initiative to expand Medicaid. In the Virginia election, Danica Rome made history as the first transgender state representative in the United States. And Ashley Bennett, who you will hear from later this hour, challenged her local Republican officeholder after he mocked the Women's March. She ran against him and won. The latest poll finds that 52% want Democrats to control Congress next year. Democrats might have much more to be thankful about a year from now. Joining us now, Ezra Klein, editor-at-large at Vox and the host of the podcast, The Ezra Klein Show. Also with us, Steve Schmidt, a Republican strategist and an MSNBC political analyst. And Steve, there are so many items on the report card to cover. But first of all, when we sit here in November, having looked at election night this November, what does that tell us about the Trump and Republican Party political report card?
Well, the magnitude of the failure a year on after the election is hard to overstate. You have the most unpopular president in the history of polling this soon into his election, just faced his first off-year election and was rebuked all across the country, a Democratic tidal wave that well may be a harbinger of the tidal wave to come in 2018. We see a president under investigation, an investigation moving closer all the time to the Oval Office. We see a president of the United States who has diminished America's standing in the world, who has degraded the office of the presidency, who has been rebuked by the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as unfit, stating that he's worried about his capacity to fulfill his responsibilities as commander-in-chief and to be entrusted with the nation's nuclear arsenal. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans suffering on the Virgin Islands and in Puerto Rico after a malfeasant and incompetent response. We've seen a collapse for all time of the moral authority of a president of the United States after he talked about the good people, neo-Nazis marching in a hate march where an innocent young woman was killed. And we see the lack of rectitude and probity in his cabinet, the corruption, the dishonesty, the lying. It's been a tough year for the country, but a year on, it seems that a coalition is forming, and it's made up of all of the Democrats, 65 to 70% of the independents, and about 25% of the Republicans that are saying enough of all of this. And as we head into the Christmas season, the Republican Party is stained and diminished. Its moral collapse, its intellectual rot completely exposed through this tax cut, and its wavering around support for the pedophile nominee in the Alabama Senate race.
Let's take a look at a couple of the best-known Trump campaign promises, the absolutely clearest ones, the ones he could say quickest and easiest. First of all, on Obamacare. Let's listen to that promise.
We will repeal the disaster known as Obamacare and create new health care, all sorts of reforms that work for you and your family.
And then, of course, the primal scream of the campaign, build the wall. Let's listen to the Trump promise on that.
I will build a great, great wall on our southern border, and I will have Mexico pay for that wall. Mark my words.
Ezra Klein, the report card doesn't look good on those two tests.
No, it doesn't look good on virtually any of his policy promises. This is, I think, something we really have learned about Trump. It's something that people didn't quite realize about him coming in. Everybody knew Trump wasn't a policy details guy. They knew he wasn't exactly a wonk. But there was a view that what Trump had were strong policy intuitions. He had a core philosophy. He cared about the wall. When he said that he was not going to touch Medicaid or Medicare or Social Security, he meant it. He maybe didn't know how he would not touch them, but he meant it. When he said that he was going to repeal and replace Obamacare, but do it with something that gave more people insurance, gave them lower deductibles, made sure everyone was covered, that he meant it. And so what Trump would be was a manager. He would have people who would carry out his views about policy. They would figure out the details. They would write the legislation. They would write the proposals. And then he came in, and it turned out he just didn't care. He doesn't really care about the wall. He didn't care about any of his promises on Obamacare. He wants anything that someone will tell him is a win. If that win contradicts everything he promised his voters, if that win has nothing to do with the Republican populism he was believed to be bringing into office, it doesn't matter. And in part because he doesn't care about anything but a win, and he doesn't understand any of the policy details, and he doesn't keep to any of the actual things that he promised, he doesn't make good arguments for them. He's not gotten any of them passed. When he goes down to the Hill to try to tell Republicans to vote for what he wants, it's a disaster every single time because he's not able to answer any of their questions. The fact that at the absolute core of the American presidency is someone who doesn't know, care, or understand any of the policy he is trying to make has been a huge problem. But for Democrats who want to see Donald Trump get nothing done, it's been an incredible boon.
And Steve Schmidt, during the campaign, Donald Trump praised James Comey and the FBI when they were investigating Hillary Clinton's State Department email, and now this year fires James Comey in what appeared to be an attempt to shut down an FBI investigation.
Well, the extraordinary aspect about that is if you were advising Donald Trump, you would go into the office every morning and say, Mr. President, the one thing we can never let happen is for there to be the appointment of a special counsel. And like so many of Trump's afflictions, they're self-inflicted. And the James Comey debacle, chief among them. And so what we have now, a year later, over and over and over again, 100% of the time, 100% of the people around Donald Trump, around the campaign, they have lied about their connections to Russians during the course of the campaign. And we all expect that there will be more indictments, that the noose will tighten, and this will be a major drama in 2018. We've never seen a level of investigation and corruption amongst the cabinet officials in the modern era like we're seeing around this president.
Steve Schmidt and Ezra Klein, thank you both very much for joining us on this special edition of The Last Word. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Coming up, now that we've all enjoyed the Thanksgiving holiday, the Christmas shopping season is officially underway, and number one on President Trump's gift list is a giant corporate tax cut.
We're going to give the American people a huge tax cut for Christmas. Hopefully that will be a great, big, beautiful Christmas present.
The Republicans don't yet have enough votes in the Senate to pass the Trump tax cuts. All of the undecided Republican senators are worried about how much the tax cuts will increase the deficit and the debt. That could be the issue that kills the Trump tax bill. And so the Trump administration is trying to create new math. They are insisting that the official estimate that the tax cuts will increase the national debt by $1.5 trillion is wrong, because wages will increase so dramatically that the new tax revenue on those increased wages will save us from an increase in the debt. And for most economists, this is a little bit like hearing your pilot announce at takeoff from New York that you'll be in Paris in an hour.
My Council of Economic Advisors estimates that this change, along with a lower tax rate, would likely give the typical American household a $4,000 pay raise. Could be a lot more than that, too. You haven't heard this. So about a $4,000 amount of money additional for the American family to spend. That's very exciting.
Joining us now, Harvard Professor of Economics, Lawrence Summers. And Professor Summers, if you don't mind, I'm going to spend a bit longer than usual on your introduction because you served as the head of the White House Economic Council in the Obama administration, and you served as the Treasury Secretary in the Clinton administration during the longest period of sustained economic growth in the United States history. And most importantly, you were the last Treasury Secretary to leave office with a federal budget surplus. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, you managed to serve as president of Harvard University. And so I don't know exactly which of these titles I should be using, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary, Professor, but there's no one whose analysis of this bill I value more than yours. And so let's just begin with this pay raise, this $4,000 pay raise to possibly $9,000 pay raise that the president is promising because of a corporate tax cut. And that's what his economic advisors seem to be telling him to say.
It's a nonsense number. It's true that if you cut corporate taxes, you don't think at all about the deficits, that there probably will be some increased investment and there'll be some increase in wages. But to suggest that it's $4,000 to $9,000 as they have is to be absurd. To do the calculation taking no account of the adverse consequences of the budget deficit is professional malpractice. To do the calculation, not recognizing the many complex features of the bill, the aspects involving the incentives that are already present for new investment, is to do it at a level that would not pass in an undergraduate course. This is not serious stuff. You know, the University of Chicago Business School, which is traditionally thought of as a redoubt of conservatism, surveys a group of several dozen major professional economists in both political parties on public policy issues of the day. They did their survey, and only 2% agreed with the proposition that it would substantially raise the GDP after a decade, and no one professed to be confident that the tax cut would pay for itself. So their analysis isn't just inconsistent with what former Democratic officials say, it's out of the range of reasonable professional opinion. You know, if you had to make a forecast as to what the weather was going to be next Thanksgiving, nobody knows. It could turn out that the weather in Washington is 70 degrees, but it would be a crazy forecast to make. You'd want to make a forecast that was based on the recent experience. In the same way, there is nothing in the experience of the Reagan tax cut, in the experience of the Bush tax cut, in the experience of the tax cuts increases that took place in 1993 to support the kind of claims that are being made here. Nothing.
And the part of the reason, it seems to me, politically, why they're arguing that there will be this big wage increase is because the people they are talking to about the wage increase are not really getting any significant tax cuts. So they have to tell them their benefit is going to come through an increase in their paycheck.
It's 2 points, Lawrence. One, many of them aren't even going to get a tax cut next year. But two, the bill is designed to phase out the tax cuts for the middle class while it's phasing in the tax cuts for the very wealthy. So if you look at middle class people, nearly half of them are getting tax increases by the time you get to the end of the 10-year window. This is a I don't know if conspiracy is the right word. This is responsive to the interests of the people who have supported many who are in the Congress and who have supported the president. This is not tax legislation that is in the interest of the vast majority of Americans. They're going to be saddled with debt. They're going to be at risk of losing vital health insurance. They're, in many cases, going to see tax increases. And for what? So we can try to win a race to the bottom to bring corporations home from the Cayman Islands rather than having stricter, more appropriate rules that assure that you can't move your income to the Cayman Islands. in order to give a tax break to the 0.2% of Americans who now pay the estate tax? That's right, 998 out of 1,000 Americans do not pay the estate tax. Are the two who pay it the group in our society that's most in need of a tax cut right now? I don't think so. In order that they can have a comprehensive tax reform and leave largely unaltered the famous carried interest loophole that politicians of both parties have been railing against for a decade, this is really a almost completely misguided bill. It is a prostitution of the concept of tax reform. We did tax reform very effectively in 1986. There were three principles. The first principle was revenue neutrality. We weren't going to bloat the budget deficit. The second principle was preserve distribution. We're not using it as an opportunity to soak the rich, but we're certainly not using it as an opportunity to tilt the playing field towards those who are most fortunate. And the third principle was close shelters, don't open them. This bill raises the deficit, tilts towards the rich, and creates a massive new set of tax